this chart that you had in here, and I'll see if I can pull it up, which was the three different S curves. That was so cool. This one right here, which I know you're familiar with, and we'll put that up on the screen for everybody. Let's talk about that because it is really interesting how, and I think it just intuitively made sense how store value phase, which we're in right now, is such a big phase and so important to developing the next phases. And I think a lot of people in crypto and the big block wars, where it's about like, no, we need to jump right to unit of account as quick as possible in order for this to be successful. But you really lay out a case why jumping there too early is going to create issues or failures,
Yep.
especially for the companies trying to do that. So let's maybe talk through these three different phases and why one is so important for the next one to be successful.
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head. Like a lot of these crypto protocols that have tried to jump towards this like unit of account, unit of exchange type functions out the gate, uh, it's putting the cart before the horse, and because of that, they have ended up undermining a lot of their value from moving prematurely into some of these other functions. It's kind of interesting that I didn't really call it in the papers. I've always viewed that as very similar to actually kind of how the fiat dollar has emerged. It emerged and it had to get there by being a good store of value over time. But once it was so deeply entrenched as a medium of exchange and unit of account, that's when we were actually able to undermine those original store of value properties that made the dollar so valuable and dominant in the world.
Mm,
And now
interesting.
it's so deeply entrenched as a medium of exchange and unit of account, it's very hard to reverse that. And I feel like crypto was trying to go after a similar
That's a
strategy.
that's a really good point because we're actually at this precipice in history, right, where we're seeing the erosion of the treasury. We're seeing the store
Mm-hmm.
of value be eroded, but greater adoption of unit of account through USDT, USDC, spreading the dollar
Mm-hmm.
globally. That
Mm-hmm.
I never thought of it from that angle. That's really insightful. So you
Yeah,
so you
that's
unit of account could persist for some time, even though store value is starting to deteriorate in the dollar.
right. Right. I mean, it's just like the dollar, once it's denominated in the majority of global contracts, it has the deepest and most liquid capital markets surrounding it. It just becomes very hard for anybody to de dollarize over time. It's very impractical. It's very costly. It's very risky to find an alternative.
So back in Nashville, right, we heard so much about Bitcoin becoming a part of the U.S. Treasury. So obviously, starting to people, the powers that be are starting to look at Bitcoin as a store of value that's going to support the treasury. I think that's their thinking now. But
Mm-hmm.
eventually, obviously, as a Bitcoiners, we're thinking that's going to just supplant the treasury. So you see a future then where Bitcoin becomes a store of value that then the dollar is the unit of account that's riding on top of that, at least sort of as an intermediate phase.
Yeah, potentially is an intermediate phase. It's I don't think I don't think anybody has like a very clear view. I like the way that I currently view the world from like a spectrum standpoint of the future of Bitcoin is I think I view the worst case scenario for Bitcoin as digital gold 2.0.
Right.
Um, I think that there's a large percentage of the market that's factoring in some sort of probability that Bitcoin fails at this point, and I think that's misguided. I think that it's not really going to fail at all anymore. The worst case scenario is it gets like captured as a form of digital gold asset. It's like controlled and custodial services that Wall Street's like selling products around or something.
Right.
And best case scenario is a completely neutral, Bitcoin denominated global economy at the other end of the spectrum. And
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, we could have these dollar interim periods. And I like when people ask me in meetings, where do I see Bitcoin over in 10 years? The answer I've come up with is I think there's going to be some sort of consortium of emerging market economies that are conducting trade and settlement, maintaining a significant portion of their reserves. El Salvador was there. Some of these African economies that are looking at adoption are coming. There's more Latin American economies we think are on the fringe. I mean, when's Argentina going to fall? Um, and a lot of this is going to build momentum towards a neutral settlement form of collateral that's going to start to make a lot of sense amongst them, where they're going to be like, why are we doing this in dollars right now? We all have Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to make a lot more sense. So like I see that starting to happen, and like that's probably still like store of value phase type functionality, using it as like a sovereign reserve, using it to settle collateral. You can argue that it's a little bit like medium exchange, and the semantics really are is what's important. And with this three different phases of the functions of money for adoption, it's it's illustrative of how to think about things and helps people kind of like frame the forms of adoption. But the primary point is that the store value phase is going to be the most important thing towards leading towards adoption of everything else. When we're looking at businesses today, there's a lot of medium exchange type businesses. It's not to say they're not valuable. It's not to say that they can't be good investments, but generally speaking, the majority of the value we expect to fall towards businesses that are supporting Bitcoin as a store of value. We think that there's a lot of room for growth within that market before people start really using it as a medium exchange, and by the time the it's going to be medium exchange adoption is going to be very obvious once it has captured the store of value market. Because the point I was just making, we're going to be in a position where it's like most people have Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden it's going to be like, yeah, settling between us is going to make, I have Bitcoin, you have Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's going to be a massive market. The price volatility is going to go down as like credit markets around it start to mature. We have more passive buyers. That is one of the major benefits of a lot of these financial products that are emerging around it is I think like passive, consistent, long-term flows of investment are going to be more significant through this over time. And like all these complexities are coming together to basically mean it's just becoming a better store value over time. And as people own it, it's going to be so much easier to make that transition to medium exchange. And once everybody's trading in it, all of a sudden, well, why are we denominating our trade in it?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this process comes over multiple decades, and it's going to take a very long period of time. It's hard to really say what the timing of all of it's going to be, but I hope that I'm wrong, because since I've been involved in this industry, things have always happened much more quickly than I ever would have expected.
Right.
To think that we would have, presidential candidates running their platforms on it this year, like never would have guessed that would happen domestically in the US. I would have thought that had been more of like an emerging market thing for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yet here we are, and things are moving quickly. So it could actually be much more quick than we'd expect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in this adoption for store value, do you have in your mind sort of a metric as like what percentage of the global population we would be getting to as far as ownership, where we're kind of at the top of the S curve there? Have you gone that deep on it?
It's one of those things where like we could try to quantify it as much as we want. It's hard. It's really going to be hard to say exactly what it'll come out to. I think that there's different like market sizes that we can look at. That a bunch of people have attempted to quantify if Bitcoin is capturing and demonetizing store value functionality across all these other asset categories that exist today, not just gold, not just silver, but equities, credit markets, all these things people are using as a store of value. If it captures that, then it could get to this size, and maybe it's somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. We don't really know. What I know is that, to your point about like population, it seems like it would be significant, right? Like it seems like if I imagine a world in which 50% of the population in the US owns Bitcoin, now it's a majority. Now it's most people that you're talking to are participating in this economy. It's not something where, every time you bring it up, you have to explain it to them or you have to give some opinion on it or debate it. It's this thing that's kind of just like cultural. The same way that like people are getting a credit card at a certain age, and people get a cell phone at a certain age, and people buy some Bitcoin instead of buying stocks on Robinhood. Like I think that we're going to get to a point where it's going to be something like that. Maybe that number is 50%. It's definitely around there.
Right. It's interesting if you think about sovereign adoption or sovereigns beginning to use Bitcoin as a store of value, how much quicker that ramps that up, and then I start to think about sort of like I take the way that BRICS are settling their currency trades in gold and I think that would probably be the next phase of Bitcoin adoption at the sovereign level, is if we now have Bitcoin as a treasury asset, does it start to force them to think about managing their currency relative to their Bitcoin treasury?
Yep.
And then that in itself, in my mind, would be a massive win for humanity. And I
Yep.
think it is the way that just even if we just won store value, the better outcomes we could have for humanity.
Yep.
Um, but it's obviously just to a certain degree it would be sort of like we've only achieved a third of our growth, right, or a third of our growth potential.
Yep.
And so how do you see then this next phase, medium of exchange? Is it purely driven from people have acquired enough Bitcoin that they're now telling the world, I want to spend this with you? Because I do that with Bitcoiner friends. Right, this weekend I went out and bought some exercise equipment from a friend of mine, and I paid him in Bitcoin because he's a Bitcoiner. I tried to tip a friend the other day who did some work for me in Bitcoin. And he's like, I don't know. So I had to show him how to download a wallet, and he let me into his Coinbase account, and I saw that he owned a bunch of shit coins. I was like, what are you doing? I've been talking to you about Bitcoin for freaking 8 years, and now I get into your wallet, and I'm shocked. You haven't done anything I asked you to do. But and he didn't even know how to accept a Bitcoin payment, right? So it's sort of like it's shocking how far you have to go down the rabbit hole, right, before you start to think a medium of exchange. And I'm wondering if you guys have put some sort of thought into like when does that become rational for a VC to invest in that phase, or what kind of metrics you're looking for before that becomes interesting, or maybe you're already thinking far enough ahead that you want to plant seeds there. I'm not sure.
That's a great question. Um, I think that there's plenty of things we could look at in terms of like payment volumes and adoption that exist and how that's trending over time, and looking at different types of users and different markets and saying what are the habits of these users, why are they using it, and so you can look at all of that preemptively. You could say like, okay, it's coming in this direction. It's like today, it's what's the best use case for Bitcoin? Holding it,
Mm-hmm.
and we have a ton of data that supports that. And our expectation for why that's going to continue is that I think you don't need to have like a ton of data to reason intuitively that people want to hold Bitcoin because it's going to go up in price. And until that's one of the key aspects I think that we're looking at. I think that that's also a key aspect that makes an argument for investing in Bitcoin businesses in the not too distant future is that it's going to be this very high growth economy, but there's going to be diminishing marginal returns to investing in Bitcoin directly.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is how many more cycles do we have of, Bitcoin going up 10, 20x within a matter of years? We don't really know. If it becomes a global neutral monetary system over the next like 40, 50 years, then it's probably going to have very, very high returns. My belief is that a lot of that's if there's going to be certain inflection points, which is why we describe these adoption cycles as S curves. It's like there's going to be a few inflection points for the asset, and each one might be a little bit less than the last. I think store value is probably going to be the biggest, and that's going to capture quite a bit of how we're using it. There's a bunch of complexity I can go into around why I think all of that, but in any event, I think as long as the incentive is that I would view the inflection point towards medium exchange is once a very broad set of assets now that are investable by the majority of the population are now coming in line with return expectations of Bitcoin, that people are going to start investing in those for pursuit of risk, using Bitcoin as a store of value in the near term, and then spending it more effectively. But I know that every time I spend from my Bitcoin wallet, there's always that the opportunity cost of capital on that's going to be incredibly high to me over time. And I try to avoid that. And until that starts to change, I think we'll see store value phase continue.
Right. Because it really ties right back to Gresham's law, right? If you're going to spend the weaker currency first. And so there's always that. I mean, when I go into my wallet, I'm like, credit card, cash, Bitcoin. Well, let's use the credit card first. If I have to, then cash, and then lastly, if I'm spending Bitcoin, it's because just want to support another Bitcoiner, you know? So
Right. Exactly.
at this point, when you start to do just the internal mental calculations, it would seem rational to me that you wouldn't really start spending your Bitcoin in a big way until maybe the sovereigns are forced to manage their currency against Bitcoin. Or like you said, the CAGR on Bitcoin gets down somewhere closer to the inflation rate. Then you're kind of like, well, I'll go either way. This is the easiest, most seamless. I'm earning in Bitcoin. I can pay out in Bitcoin, kind of thing. Before we get there. So you feel similarly.
Right. Yeah. Because like today, people still view like, it's not that I don't believe Bitcoin is a great form of long-term savings, but how the market perceives it is it's an investment. This is a risk asset to the vast majority of the people that own it. Very few people are like, okay, I'm going to use this as a form of long-term savings, and I have enough alternative sources of capital to where I can, suffer through those short-term volatility risks. It's a very like developed world economy perspective on what Bitcoin is. Most people can't financially insure themselves to like suffer volatility. So it's something where like, that's just going to exist for a long period of time. And maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10, maybe it's a lot longer. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think as Bitcoiners, that have gone through a few cycles, you immediately start to think about all these other things that Bitcoin's going to be used for, and you want to build for that future.
Right.
But man, it's like, when you come back down to it, and when you have these conversations with people that don't understand Bitcoin yet, you're like, holy smokes, man, we have so far to go just on store of value still. Yeah. I mean, $1 trillion, 1.2 trillion, whatever we are now, it's a drop in the bucket still.
So you've heard Bitcoin is the new gold rush by now. As world leaders on all sides have endorsed it as the future of money, and now you're looking to get started, we'll show you how. It's actually easier than you think. First, go to your nearest Byte Federal ATM and turn your cash to coin. Byte Federal has over 1,200 locations around the country with the highest daily limits. Go to our website, bytefederal.com, to find the nearest ATM to you. Log in to any wallet, then create an account, deposit your US cash, and instantly convert it to Bitcoin. That's it. We are the only US manufacturer and operator in the Bitcoin ATM industry, and our US-based live customer service is second to none. Go on, give it a whirl, and don't get left behind. Click the link below.